Hello everyone, welcome to another fantastic webinar from Internshape. Today we have something very special lined up for you. We are going to witness an extraordinary conversation between two extraordinary people, a young futurist and a veteran of the industry. Without further ado, let me introduce you to our very special guest, Pupul Bisht. Pupul is a multidisciplinary futurist, and she won the Joseph Jaworski Next Generation Foresight Practitioners Award in 2018. Pupul is currently working with Nesta in the United Kingdom, and she is developing a global anthology on participatory futures, and she is also the youngest member of the Action Foresights of the Global Swarm. Pupul's practice is currently rooted on human-centered insights, and it's based on the intersection of futures thinking, design, and participatory research. She founded the Decolonizing Futures Initiative project in 2018. It is a global project and it aims to engage marginalized communities in imagining their preferred futures. Pupul, hi, thank you so much for joining us today. So glad to have you here.
Thank you so much, Ananya. It's my pleasure.
Great. And leading this conversation, of course, will be our favorite veteran, Piyush Srivastava. He, of course, is the CEO of Internshape. Hi, Piyush. How are you doing today?
Thank you so much, Ananya.
I'm going to get out of your way and please lead the way now.
All right, Ananya. See you in a bit. So, hi, Pupul. Welcome. It's so wonderful to see you here today. And when Ananya was talking about you, she said that you are a futurist. Well, now, so what is this futurist? Are you going to tell me my future by looking at my hand? Is it something like that?
I have to confess, this is definitely not the first time that I'm on the receiving end of this joke. Whenever somebody hears or I tell them that I'm a futurist, especially in India, actually, I think it's definitely a very underexplored field in India, and people are not very aware of it. I didn't know that a job like this or a profession like this could exist. And सबसे पहली image exactly जो आपने बोला वही दिमाग में आती है. हम लोग मेले में जाते हैं and there you go, you give 50 rupees or 100 rupees and कोई आपका हाथ देखेगा, चेहरा देखेगा या एक crystal ball में देखकर then they'll tell you when you should get married and how long are you going to live, etc. So but I do not study the stars and the divine forces or palms or crystal balls. What I do study, however, and pay a lot of attention to and spend my time professionally observing and thinking about is forces of change and drivers of change in our world, in our environment. And when I talk about change, एक misconception रहता है कि जैसे ही फ्यूचर के बारे में बात करते हैं सबसे पहली चीज दिमाग में टेक्नोलॉजी आती है. We think that the only thing that will change in the future is technology, but that's a very limited and often dangerous way of thinking about the future. So my job is to take a holistic view of change, think about how politics is changing, think about how environment is changing, think about how culture, value systems, in our society is changing, how ecology is changing, how economics is changing, and also how technology is changing, and how all these different changes, complex changes, are going to come together and interact with each other, and what kind of new possibilities and new worlds is that interaction going to create. So that is really what my job is. So I'm not in the business of predicting futures. I am in the business of exploring futures, evaluating futures, and engaging with all the, like a spectrum of possibilities in the future. So in a regular work day, which some of you might have picked up from Ananya's introduction of me, I would work with government departments, I would work with business leaders, with organizations, and sometimes even with communities to help them make sense of a changing world so that they can make better, strategic, and intentional decisions today. So the application of a futurist work, actually contrary to what one might expect, is in the present. And yeah, so that's what I do.
All right, Popul. I think this is very correct that our traditional thinking of job is to work in a function and stay in that function and retire from there. But the current world is very different. You can move from one role to another swiftly because things are changing so rapidly. The technology is changing so rapidly. And if you are adapted to the newer things, you keep finding the newer avenues to work on. Now, let me just look at yourself. It was like you were exploring yourself at a very early and young age. You went to the fashion and went to the best institute, which is NIFT. Then you thought about design and you went to NID. And then you thought further and you went to Ontario College of Art and Design and did your master's there. And look at you today. You're a futurist. And that's an interesting journey, Gopal. And that's pretty exciting. And also, that is very inspiring for the youngsters. Why don't you tell me your own story? How you moved from fashion to design to Canada and to being a futurist? Go ahead.
Really good question. Like I said, I did not, when I was younger, or even 10 years ago. 10 years ago, I was in 12th standard, I think. So, you know, so a lot of attendees are probably at that age. So they can relate to that. I did not know that this job exists. So yet 10 years down the line, here I am, right? And I think that's because we're talking about future of work, future of jobs. I think that that's relevant to our conversation. That's a lot of the people, you know, when they're right at the end of their high school or even undergrad life, we get so worried about trying to predict exactly what will our career look like. But I just want to first say to all of them listening right now and later to the recording is that as a futurist, I can tell you that the world is changing so fast that you probably don't even, a job that you'll be doing 10 years from now probably doesn't even exist right now. So I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind, because that, you know, builds our muscle to, it's like a dance. You have to dance to an unknown rhythm. You know, आप एक club में जाते हैं, आप हर एक गाना क्या बजने वाला है, you don't know. You just have to be ready to groove along with it. I think that's really a good metaphor of, you know, how I actually approached my life. I can't say that's the right or the wrong way of approaching. And my story is really interesting in that. So, you know, I was a science student in my 11th and 12th, and I enjoyed it, but it wasn't really my passion. I was always extremely active in extracurriculars. I was a national level debater and I was a dancer. So I was a cultural president of my school, and I found out quite early that, you know, all the work that I was doing in my extracurriculars really brought me more joy, and I felt like that was my authentic self. So जब college जाने की बात आई, I did apply in DU. You know, I also stood in lines, got all those forms. So, and I would have been happy if I went there, but I also really did lean creatively, and थोड़ा मेरा family से भी influence था. I had really great examples to look up to. And लेकिन जब मेरे को design, when I told people I want to do design, I was an artist in that I was a performing artist. I was never a visual artist. So a lot of people, I was met with a lot of doubt in that, अरे draw नहीं करते हो तो designer कैसे बन सकते हो? You know, it was such an outrageous thought for people. But, you know, it's later on when I actually went to NID, which is the most prestigious design school in India, the first thing I learned is you do not need to know how to draw to be a designer. You know, so there are so many assumptions that we carry about professions and skills and everything, and it's important to treat them exactly as they are. They're just assumptions. And मेरे को अब बाद में सोच के लगता है कितना ridiculous thought है to tell a 17-year-old you can't be something because you don't have a skill. You have such a long life ahead of you. But हमारे दिमाग में that mindset is there कि you have to do everything that you can by 25, and then life is a straight static line.
Absolutely.
It's not that at all, at least in my. So I finished design, and the first thought, and I got to work on some really incredible design projects. And the first thought, so my final graduation project, I redesigned the Caravan magazine, jo Delhi Press se chhapti hai. It's quite a well-known magazine, and they have a very interesting approach to journalism, and they do something called long form or narrative journalism. लंबी articles and कहानियां लिखते हैं वो लोग. तो उस टाइम पे मेरे को लगा कि यार जो मैं डिजाइन कर रही हूँ उसमें कितना पावर है. Anything I conceptualize on my sketchbook today is going to be produced in the future and live in the future, and it's going to impact people's lives and therefore the world in the future. But as a designer, I was not trained to think about the kind of impact I'm having on the world. And that is what I wanted to learn about. And I didn't want to be oblivious to how I can change the world. I wanted to take control of it and do it more intentionally, so that I knew that I was applying my time and my effort and my creativity towards creating change that I want to see in the world. And that's really what inspired me to study this subject and go to Toronto, to OCAD University.
Pupul, I think I must compliment you for breaking this thinking mold that a career of any individual is being taught by their parents or by the environment very early in their life. ये डॉक्टर बनेगा, ये इंजीनियर बनेगा, ये पायलट बनेगा, ये लॉयर बनेगा, ये चार्टर्ड अकाउंटेंट बनेगा. I think for a young person to move into their own journey should be the part of exploration rather than dictation. And I feel about your journey, when I look at your journey, I think because you were still very young when you would have decided to move from fashion to design, I think there were two factors which would have possibly impacted you. One would have come from the environment. When I say environment, it means the family, the friend, the so-called society expectation that they would have wanted you to become something which is accepted as a norm. And there may be sometimes self-doubts in yourself, whether I am doing something right or I'm doing something wrong. So, or I do not know if you were always motivated like you are today about yourself. So why don't you tell me that, did you have any time or any point of time of your career you were having self-doubts, or you were just going ahead with the flow?
Self-doubt to tha, self-doubt abhi bhi hota hai, and I also struggle like most young people my age. I struggle with something called imposter syndrome, where you're constantly challenging yourself. And I've been very blessed in the recent past, wherein my work has taken me to rooms where I am the least knowledgeable person. I'm the youngest usually, and everyone is smarter than me in those rooms. Whether I'm speaking at the European Parliament or whether I'm in Parsons School of Design in New York. And to wo doubt to aata hai, but you have to believe in the perspective and the angle and the life experience that only you have, that no one else in the room has. So whatever I've done, I'll say that it wasn't a product of my confidence. It wasn't a product of my overconfidence either. It was just a product. If I did anything right, I think is that at a very young age, I committed to myself that I will bring my authentic self to whatever I do. And then I'll do it unapologetically. And as long as I'm not creating harm by way of my work, I'm all right. There is time and space to explore, and nobody can stop you. That's your right. because you have one life and you cannot leave. So instead of seeing my life as a straight line, or a neatly colored square, I try to think of it as collage or a Venn diagram, where I'm a lot of things and I don't owe it to anybody, or nobody owes it to anyone to just be one thing. If you want to be three things, be three things. But if you really love one thing and you only want to do that, that's also fine. But unfortunately, क्या है, इस पे एक बहुत अच्छी TED talk है जो मैंने recently सुना, and I'm forgetting the name, maybe we can share it later, but it's about how we are fed culturally, we are fed this story that you find your passion and then you keep working towards it and then you achieve it, and that's the only way to be successful. But actually studies show that people who explore a lot and stumble finally upon something that satisfies them later in life, in their late 20s, early 30s, or even later, actually end up breaking a lot of barriers and records and become the trailblazers in their field. So I think we all just need to keep reminding ourselves and start observing success stories which look slightly different from the conventional mold that we are fed.
That's an interesting perspective, Popul. Let me just take this to some other aspect of our discussion. I think that we must understand one reality of human race itself, that the human species is 70,000 years old on this planet. And if you look at the human as an animal, it has survived 70,000 years of evolution. And important thing to understand is this, that how it was possible for human being to not only survive, but kept on improving, kept on learning new things. And today, in one sense, the planet is largely governed by human being. And how it has happened, I think there is one interesting and important factor in human being staying relevant and improving constantly has been that their ability to ask question. They have constantly asked questions. They have been inquisitive all the time. Why a particular thing is happening, how a particular thing is happening. Let me figure it out. Let me find it out. And that is how they have explored. They have conquered the whole uh, domain of this word. And now they are exploring themselves to go ahead into the space and trying to look at, various things which is around us, which we can see. Sometimes we cannot see it, but they are going there into the other territories of this universe. And this is incredible. And one thing which has been constantly stayed with human being is ability to ask question. पूछते रहना है, हर बार पूछते रहना है और उसको जानने की कोशिश करते रहना है. If changes are rapid around us, and if we are constantly asking questions, so what are we getting while asking questions? We are getting information, we are getting data. And Yuval Harari says the next god of humanity is going to be the data. So if you look at it, the entire technological change which is happening is coming from data. So one side there is data, algorithms, and other side there is human brain. And an interesting phenomena which is occurring in front of our eyes, which is actually phenomenal, that data and brain are getting merged together. And that is creating a huge opportunity of newer area of engagement or for jobs, if you want to say that. If you ask me what kind of job will be in future, I have no answer on that. I can only say that how the whole technology is taking shape is either it is artificial intelligence, or it is cloud technology, or it is augmented reality and the virtual reality. It is big data. It is drone technology, self-driven vehicles, Internet of Things. Every data, if you look at minutely, there is an element of logic which will be done by, let's say, robots, algorithms, but there is an element of human angle or human behavioral responses to everything which is happening. And I feel that is where the jobs are coming to be. That is where the human being will always stay relevant. That is where human being will always continue to contribute towards the newer explorations, towards the new discoveries, and towards the newer horizon to conquer for. So this will all happen where human intervention can never be replaced by machine or by logic. And I think the future will be full of jobs into these areas, which I anticipate. Now, as we are moving ahead, and as I'm reflecting, people, about your talk about how your journey has been, and I have read with huge interest about your concept of decolonizing the future. It's an interesting thought, very interesting and unique thought, actually. Now, I want to ask you one question straightforward, that the past, though has been very glorious, though has been very successful for human being as a species, they have survived. But the fact is this, that it has also created a divide between the human societies. It has created the divide between rich and poor. It has created the divide between powerful and less powerful. It is kind of creating divide between being digital and not being digital. And I feel that the future has to be inclusive. It has to be a future which provides opportunity for all. There should be no division. There should be no disparity between this human species, so to say. I will also say that there should be no disparity between human and the environment. We all have to grow together. We have learned that environment is not something which is separate than us. We all have to in live in harmony, living together. So that is where my question comes to you, people, that what is this decolonizing the future is all about? And in your own eyes, this decolonizing the future is inclusive or otherwise?
Thank you. I think that's a really, really important thing to be talking about when we talk about the future. And I think I want to take a step back and talk about a mindset that we all have when we talk about the future. Is that we believe that there is a singular future and that is going to happen. So there is this, we have a reactive attitude towards the future versus a proactive attitude towards the future. We think that this future happens to us. But as a creative, as someone working in this field, and as someone who founded an initiative like Decolonizing Futures Initiative, my first and foremost appeal or encouragement to people is that we create future by the decisions and the actions that we take in the present. So future is not inevitable. We are constructing it with our choices every single day, you know. So वो चीज जो है ना दिमाग में रखनी बहुत जरूरी है, because we need to realize we have agency and we have a role to play in the future that comes out in 10 years or 20 years from now. That's the first thing, because if we don't believe in that, then we're all just going to give up, and it's going to be like being in the passenger seat of a car and someone else is driving. And jo Decolonizing Futures Initiative ki baat aapne ki, which also came from this same place, because when I was studying futures in Canada, I suddenly started getting this very uncomfortable feeling, because I realized, you know, global futures kahan pe manufacture hote hain. अगर आज हम बात करें, especially from we are living in an extremely technologically driven world, and you said Harari says data will be God. Data is already currency, and money is God. So data is already God, or at least the people who are holding on to data have assumed godlike status. They're the most powerful people in our world today.
Absolutely.
And if you really think about it, futures of the world are being manufactured in Silicon Valley and shipped to all the other countries around the world. But we are not Silicon Valley, we're India. We have our own history, we have our own culture, we have our own values, and we have a very different way of looking at the world. And similarly, different communities, whether you talk about Africa, you talk about indigenous communities in North America, in Australia, you talk about other Asian cultures, we all have such a different way of looking at the world. But currently, our imagination of what the future might look like and what is possible or even desirable in the future is so Eurocentric, it's so America focused, it's extremely Western governed. And that I see as a very big problem. Because we should always, our world is beautiful because it's diverse. So futures also need to be diverse. We don't need to go after what someone in Silicon Valley tells us as being the epitome of success. We need to have our own goals. We need to have our own visions, but we don't. That's the issue. So Decolonizing Futures Initiative, and why I use storytelling is because story is such an important tool of futuring, I feel, because future does not exist yet, right? It only exists in your imagination. And what you cannot imagine, you cannot create. So if we want to create inclusive futures, we first have to build stories of what those inclusive futures look like. And then once we have that narrative, once we're empowered with that narrative, then everything that we do in our society, everything that we do through our work can be informed by that vision. So that's what Decolonizing Futures is all about. How can I, using storytelling, and I use a method that I designed, and it's inspired by a folk storytelling tradition called Kawad from my native state of Rajasthan. And we, in our workshops, actually take a 10-step journey. It's like a pilgrimage. We leave our preoccupation with the present state and we travel towards a desirable vision of the future. And it's not a future that we've seen in a Hollywood movie. It's not a future that some tech CEO has sold to us. It's truly a future that's inspired by our unique environmental needs, dreams, challenges, barriers. And once we know what that future looks like, we backcast from that future and we say, अगर 10 साल में हम वहां जाना चाहते हैं, आज हमें क्या करना है, 2 साल बाद हमें क्या करना है. So you start connecting to your own. And in my work, my ultimate aim is to inspire, anyone that I work with, whether it's a company or whether it's a community. And I usually do this work in non-Western geographies, is to inspire them to start seeing themselves as active shapers of their futures rather than passive recipients of someone else's grand vision. So it's about empowerment and it's about agency.
Popul, it seems to me like the logical brain of Einstein and imaginative brain of J.K. Rowling is put together while you speak. Brilliant.
That is a very big compliment that I'm not.
I think this is absolutely very good observation and a very interesting thought, Popul, which you brought it on for, which is when we are building the future, it is our future. And this our future cannot be imported from somewhere else. We should be building the future the way we want it, which is inclusive, as I said earlier. And this can be only done by creating the future stories and creating the milestones backend to reach there. Very interesting thought. I do believe that storytelling is a very, very powerful tool to right now to not only explore new ideas, but also to ensure that the concepts and the thoughts are immersive through storytelling. It's a very powerful way of going about communicating something to your audience if you're using the techniques of storytelling. So, if you look at internship, what are we doing? We are actually provoking our students to go through an experience of learning, and their experiential learning is their own story. There are failures, there are successes, there are achievements, there are roadblocks, there are disappointments also. But the methodology which we are adopting is in such a way that a person writes his or her own story while doing any project or any assignment. And we also emphasize on one very important fact. When we say do, learn, there are elements of explorations hidden there. There is an acceptance of failure, because I also believe, as my organization drives that motive, that the failure is not something very bad. Failure is actually is a welcome incident happening in our life. Not many lucky people will have failure occurring to them, because failure is an opportunity to learn. Failure is an opportunity to do something very right the next time. Failure is an opportunity to tell us that this has to be done differently and trying a new thing. And what beautiful a life will be when you're trying newer things because you failed in a particular attempt or a particular uh, endeavor which you wanted to do it. So we went ahead by creating this model of do learn, which I was telling you, which has inbuilt ingredient of acceptance of failure, acceptance of disappointments, acceptance of roadblocks, but every time trying to find out the newer ways of doing things, the better way of doing things. And this is how we are trying to build for our younger generation, because I firmly believe that the younger generation is has got access to so much of information that only thing which we people can do is to nudge them, to give them a little direction, and they can be far more productive and useful to the entire environment, to entire country, to entire economy, to the world in a much better way than the previous generations were, because they have got the information, they have got the knowledge, and if you have the drive, they can actually conquer anything which comes their way. I was going to ask you, because this is a model which we adopt at Internship, I was going to ask you, would you like to narrate any example of your own journey where you felt that yes, doing was your learning and you did learn by doing it?
Yeah, so learning by doing is actually a philosophy. As a philosophy, is very close to my heart because it was also the core pedagogical philosophy of my undergrad university, which is National School of Design. Our entire education of 4.5 years, our training in design was based on this primary belief in learning by doing, and that being a very important means of learning. So I 100% agree with you. I think that is a really great approach to take, especially when you're young and you're in a world like this. It is important to, and I think what I really like about do learn and learn and then do is that it it implies humility, right? It implies that wherever we are today, there's no way that we can know everything that is there to know about that thing that we're trying to do. Mm-hmm. So we go into doing with that humility, knowing that we're doing and we might fail or we might succeed, But whether we fail or succeed, we will learn something in either scenario. And then whatever it is that we learn, we'll use that learning to do the next thing that we want to do. So I really, it is about that iterative feedback loop. You're constantly in conversation with the world and with yourself versus just having a very arrogant, stance of, ek cheez hai, I know how to do it, and then I'm just going, so I really think that that's a very beautiful way of approaching your career. And it's funny because it's a small story and it's inconsequential, but because we're talking about the highs of my career, I feel like it's important to talk about the lows as well.
Absolutely.
And in my third year, everyone in NID needs to do an internship, as in most colleges you need to do. And it's again because you want to learn by doing, and internships is the best way of doing that, right?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to do an internship, and graphic design, I was studying visual design basically. So the first thing, again, environmental expectations, frame your limit of your imagination. So I was like, if I'm doing graphic design, then the only place I can learn further or intern is an ad agency.
Okay.
I kept looking. Anyway, I found an internship at a really big international ad agency. I'm not going to take their name, and it was an office in Gurgaon, and I was thrilled. I prepared like a 19, 20-year-old would, and I went. 3 days in, I was so depressed because it, to me, and with all due respect to people who work in that industry, I have my own really close friends who work in the ad industry and love it. It's the love of their life. And
Yeah.
I was actually a voiceover artist. I've been working as a voiceover artist since I was 15 years old. So I have participated in that industry, but in a very different capacity.
Yeah.
But as a designer, it was a horrible place for me to be in, right? And so why I'm saying this is because at that age, I had to do an internship. So I did this thing. And then I learned something from that experience, that this work is not meant for me.
Yeah.
The option of sticking out, like sticking through the whole experience and saying, अब सबकी internship शुरू हो चुकी है, 2 महीने पहले से मैंने इसको secure करके रखा है, now have to just be here and deal with it and jhelna padega and whatever, and also just check my list of requirements from college. But once I had learned by doing that thing that it was actually not the right thing for me to do, I could not allow myself to just stay in that horrible situation for two months, because I value my time too much. So I let them know respectfully that I'm not cut out for this work. Next day, I came home in the evening. I cried, as you do. Next morning, I woke up and I put together my portfolio again from a design studio's perspective, not an agency perspective. And I sent it out to 12 studios around Delhi. And I had no hope that they'll get back because everyone had recruited 2 months ago. But by chance, on Sunday night, one studio, which actually very close to my house, they got back to me and they said, well, do you want to come on Monday, right? And then I did something again over there and I learned more. And so I think that you have to be flexible. You cannot give up too soon. That I think is very, very important. And then so this was my thing on learning by doing. But I think this relates back to storytelling as well. And because you're talking about narratives and narratives of the future, I think one thing is important is a lot of times the way we think about jobs, the way we think about careers is limited by the narrative that we have of what a good career or what a good life looks like. And let me break it to you that narratives comes from our grandparents or parents' generation.
True.
Of work, it's important to mention that we're no longer living in a world where you, in your one lifetime, you'll study, then you'll work for X number of years, and then you'll retire, and that's it. Clean, neatly packaged boxes. Actually, so my grandfather, for example, got one job in one company, spent his entire career there. That was his career, right? My parents probably worked at 2 companies, similar jobs, similar vertical, and then that's their career. But my career already in the past few years is multiple different kinds of jobs. Sometimes I'm hired as a designer, sometimes I'm hired as a futurist, sometimes I'm hired as a voiceover actress, right? And maybe in 5 years I'll pick up another skill,
Yeah.
because every single job I'm doing, by doing that job, I'm learning a new skill, and then that too is my professional identity. And all of these patchwork things are together one day, when I look back at a certain age, are going to make up my career. And that is the new narrative of what jobs and professional lives in the future are going to look like. They're not A from B. They are think of it as a constellation, not a straight road.
Absolutely. Yes. Why a career should be a straight road? It has to be constellation. If it has to be very interesting. If you look at my own journey in my whole career span of close to 37, 38 years, I have been a lecturer, I've been a salesman, I've been a distribution manager, and I have been in technology. And on the sidelines, I have also been connected to writing and doing things related to theater. So there are multiple things which I have been doing it. And I found it very interesting as well as very energetic. But today's generation is more receptive to this kind of idea that life is not only one assignment and one role and one job for their life. If you look at it, there are certain very interesting stories which has happened in the past, but they were treated as something extraordinary or rebels. Now look at the story of Habib Tanvir, the famous theater director, one of the first director in this country who brought the rural artist onto the stage. Habib Tanvir went to England to study chartered accountancy, but he landed up learning theater. Look at Vinod Mehta. He also went to London to become something else, and he has no other option to spend his time by reading newspaper, and he became editor when he came back to India, and one of the most colorful editor which this country had. If you look at poet Shailendra, he used to work in a railway factory. He used to work in railways, but he was also very fond of writing poetry. And Raj Kapoor spotted him, and Shailendra became what we know as Shailendra. Look at the cricketer Yuzvendra Chahal. He was a chess player. He loves to play chess. He was a state champion in chess, and eventually he became cricketer, and such a successful cricketer. But as I said, those were exceptions. Those are very few stories of success, but not everybody could attempt to do what these people did. Not today. Today, the youngsters are able to, stick their neck out, try new things, explore new things. And if it is not working out, they're eager to move to the next assignment, to the next job, to the next segment, to next learning. And that is the beauty of today's youngsters. And this is where I find that a lot of energy is between the youngsters' mind right now. Here, I would like to ask you that you have anyway talked about a model of career building, which you call it foresight model. Why don't you explain more about this foresight model of career building so that my young audience can also learn and benefit from this thought of yours?
So the foresight method that I do, the one that's inspired by Coward, is actually meant for collective visioning. But as a futurist, the way we conventionally engage with the future, I think, can become a great approach even for an individual to think about their own life in an uncertain time. Because right now we're living, especially COVID ke baad, I think a general anxiety hai, where we don't even feel confident in planning for the next week or the next month, because we really have no idea what's going to happen. And being in so much uncertainty can be overwhelming. So the first thing, which is a tip from foresight that I can offer to you, is that the one thing that all futurists do is that they accept that uncertainty is the normal state of anything. So you have to accept it till the time we keep, if our expectation is that the world is going to be extremely predictable and extremely certain, we are meant to, fall on our face.
Get disappointed.
Yeah, because that's not the reality
That's
of the times that is. The first tip I want to give is accept uncertainty and make it your friend, right? Don't look at it as something that is scary or intimidating. Look at it as something that's exciting, because if everything was certain, then you could only do one thing. But because everything is uncertain, that means that there are so many possibilities for you to go in any direction that you want to. So that is actually a very interesting and exciting way of looking at things. Once you make sense of it, then the second thing comes on observation, right? It's an observation sport. Understanding future is all about how much attention you pay to changes, and oftentimes we have a very narrow way of thinking. So अगर मेरे को डॉक्टर बनना है, मैं सिर्फ डॉक्टर के बारे में सोचूंगी, but actually your experience of working as a doctor is going to be impacted by technology. It's going to be impacted by politics. It's going to be impacted by society. It's going to be impacted by the environment. Because, not to be ominous, but just last week I was reading that as the Arctic permafrost is melting, new diseases are actually getting untrapped from under the ice. So, any field you want to go to, you want to have knowledge of a very, very broad range of things. You cannot think in one narrow line. The third thing is, like I said, future, there's no singular future, it's always multiple. So start saying futures. And when you say futures, then you always, from any change that you observe, you can think of multiple futures that might spring out of that one thing. And then what is the implications of those A, B, C, D scenarios on your life today and what you want to do in the future? Once you know that, then you want to think about, okay, what is the future out of all these possibilities that I want for myself or I want to create for the world? And then you backcast from that future. Like I said, so if you want to be somewhere in 20 years, what is it that you want to do 10 years out? What is it that you need to do 5 years out? And then at every stage, when we're driving on a highway, we come across milestones. And in futures work, we call this signposting.
Okay.
So if you think of a future ki aisa future ho sakta hai in 20 years, 2 years down the line, if you've signposted, you can check and see, is that coming true, or have we taken a direction that I didn't expect? And then that is your indication that you're actually moving towards a very different future. Okay. So those are a few things to keep in mind. And then one thing I want to say from my own method is that oftentimes I experience that groups of people say that they want a certain kind of a future, but their value systems are actually ones that are completely contradictory to that future. So if we say we want an inclusive future, for example, if we talk about a sustainable future, if we talk about a livable planet, which is really the most important issue right now is climate crisis that we're in the middle of, we need to ask ourselves that, do we just talk about it because we think it's a good thing to talk about? Or are we truly committed to it, right? So what are our values today? If my value is of convenience and I couldn't be bothered while consuming recycling, a non-recyclable packaging one after the other, then I can keep talking about a sustainable future, but my actions in the present are completely contradictory to that future. So doing a value assessment, what are the values you have today? What kind of values do you need in the future that you think you want? So what values do you need to get rid of, and what new values do you need to imbibe? This is very important for young people. The second thing is, think about barriers to change. Nothing is going to be an easy path. So once you identify the kind of future you want, it's important to think about all the possible barriers, all the possible obstacles that are going to come into the way, and plan for them. Right? Third and the last thing I want to say, especially for young people, and especially in the context of careers and internship and anything, is that once you have identified your barriers, it's important to think about all the allies, all your co-travelers, all the people who can help you in overcoming those barriers and create that future. We don't do anything in life by ourselves, and it's very important to think about who can help you, who's your community, who's your network.
This was a great insight. I understand where you are coming from. In today's world, the approach has to be collaborative. You got to be working in teams. You got to be working through networks, with network. You got to be working with communities. You got to be working on something with something which impacts so many people. The time has gone where you will work in a cocoon and think that you will be successful. It is possibly not possible now. So I fully agree with you what you're saying. And I'm actually very pleased to share with you that at Internshape, we are more or less following the same approach when we offer projects to our students. We make them work into teams. An interesting thing is that the teams are formed within people who have never known each other earlier. They are the teams from far off places, different cities, different streams. You can find a team consisting of chemical engineer, petroleum engineer, pharmacist, biochemistry, and MBA graduates. So we put people into team together. So two, three things happen simultaneously. They learn how to work in teams. They learn how to collaborate. They also learn how to receive and give feedback. They also learn that how important it is to understand each other constraints and how important it is to thrive on each other's strengths. So that is our model too at Internship. And I'm very glad that I'm finding a lot of similarities into internship approach and your foresight approach. Actually, if you look at my team, my advisors, my leadership team, they have a big and huge experience behind them of industry, of education industry, of technology, of digital marketing, of international market. They carry a lot of experience, but each one is bringing that experience on the table, and each one is trying to create a model which is suitable to the younger lot, my clients, my audience, which is our students who join us for program, and making us everything into a package which engages them, make them learn while doing it, and take an approach of collaboration. So, having said that, I feel very positive about internship. I feel very positive about your inputs, about your foresight model, about your decolonizing the future model, about your whole approach of being rooted into the Indian ethos and philosophy and trying to learn from that, trying to take out positive things about it and putting things into a practical model which is applicable to all. This gives me a lot of pride actually to to come to know that that is how you have been working. I think time for us here to wrap up this session. I will invite Ananya to come now, do a formal thank you, and we can say goodbye to each other till we meet the next time. So Ananya, all yours. See you.
Thank you. Well, I did promise an extraordinary conversation at the very beginning without knowing what it would entail, but you did deliver. So thank you so much. I was pretty confident on my promise. So Pupul, that was an extremely interesting discussion that you guys had. We have a bunch of questions and not enough time. So if I go through all of them one by one, I think we're going to be here all night. So what I'm going to do is try and kind of conflate them into one composite question. And maybe you can try and give a detailed answer. Piyush, maybe your thoughts would also be useful because we have two very different, very useful perspectives going on here. So most of the questions here are focused on, see, most of our audience here are young people. They are at the brink of their professional careers, and they are at a crossroads, and it's a confluence of a bunch of dilemmas, choosing between the present decisions and its impact on the future, thinking about individuals and communities, and how agile decision making at this moment would be, because the way things are presented to kids at that age is what you decide now is going to have long term impact. So I would like to have both your thoughts on these three parameters. First is about the flexibility of the decision that they make at this stage, whether it really is irreversible as it's presented to be. The second is how to marry this very inspiring sentiment of community and responsibility into specifics of decision making, because the reality is that a lot of people at this stage don't really have a very specific idea of what they want to do for the rest of their lives. So this kind of ties into the reversibility or lack thereof of the decision that they make at this point. And the third is how they can tap into the power of community and maybe get out of these very individualistic specifics, and then make their community and thereby make their own future. And basically how individual and community, based on what you've said, kind of go hand in hand. So Upul, your thoughts maybe to begin with?
Well, so I hope that, me sharing my own story has inspired people to realize that nothing is irreversible in life. And I mean, if we look at the Indian philosophy, really, everything that's born is going to, perish, and then everything that's perished is going to be reborn again. And so in India, in fact, we're really empowered by such a beautiful philosophy in looking at life. So we should be the last people who worry about permanence of things. Nothing is permanent, right? But I will say, I don't want to paint a romantic, everything is rosy picture. Even though everything can be reversed, that does not mean that it will not take effort or it won't be difficult. So it could be difficult. A decision that you make definitely has implications on your life and could make something easy or difficult for you, but that does not mean that it's impossible. And oftentimes we confuse difficulty with impossibility. So that is something that I want to say on that. And then on community and individual and responsibility, I want to say that now we're living in the world. I mean, I'm a millennial, but even if I look at the generation younger than me, the Gen Z generation, they are really taking the power of the technology that's in their hand by way of a singular device. And they are getting so creative about how they're going to use it in every way possible, whether it's to save democracy, whether it's to save the environment, whether it's to support people in social ways. I mean, look at Greta Thunberg. She's 16 years old when she started a movement. Today it has shaken even an organization as big as United Nations, where they're like, we don't know anything, you come and tell us. So I think age is not an excuse anymore. We are empowered by so much knowledge and so many different tools in our environment. So it's really just about us seeing our own power in a different way and believing that every single individual action counts towards making a change. And one thing I want to say is sometimes we feel that inaction means that you're not doing anything, so we feel like if I do something I could or could not change, but if I'm not doing something, I'm not changing anything, then it's a neutral state of being. Nothing is neutral. By not doing something, you're contributing to a reverse scenario, so you might be creating harm. Your inaction might be creating harm. And I know that this is slightly a radical thought, but I do think that young people need to just be exposed to that thinking more and more.
Yeah, I completely agree. Thank you so much for that, Upul. With that inspiration, Piyush, I want to ask you a practical question. How do we ground this inspiration into very practical decision making? Because sometimes kids find themselves facing this very blatant question, I'm not sure what I want to do. All these parameters are fantastic, and I feel the motivation to do something. I want to go out and do something, but I don't know what. So what are your thoughts on that dilemma?
Okay, Ananya, so I will answer in a very straight one liner thing on your question. First thing first, the confusion is good, the clarity is boring. And in today's world, the chaos has to be welcomed because chaos is going to be the order of the day. The destruction of the business models, the destruction of technology, the destruction of job structures, the destructions of engagement, all is happening in a rapid way all around us. And we must learn how to live with this chaos, how to steer our way from this fog. So let's be very clear, uncertainty is the friend, the chaos is not an enemy. So don't seek clarity. Just understand one thing, that in today's world and in the coming world, the journey is going to be far more important than the destination. That's one thing. The second thing is very obvious, which is keep learning, keep doing, keep learning. That's the only way of steering this environment. That's the only way to become successful. Just keep exploring, just keep learning, just keep doing, just keep admitting mistakes, just keep doing mistakes and learn more and go forward. I think that the cycle, earlier we accept in our mind, better equipped we are to handle the future. And the last thing, Ananya, which I must emphasize here, that the time has come for industry to understand that education is not something which is devoid of industrial development or technological development which is happening in some other direction, and institutions are teaching something which is happening through curriculum and courseware and teachers taking classes, and we believe and feel this system will continue to produce people who will take us to future successfully. No, the time has gone, if that time was ever there. Frankly, that time would have never come to us. Frankly, the industry and the education would have clasped hands together to move further. Now, the necessity is far more intense than any time else, which is the industry must understand, the companies must appreciate that whatever they are trying to do, they have to include the institutions, they have to include the colleges, they have to include the universities well ahead than the education comes to an end and people are looking for an opportunity into the industry, because the marriage has to happen much earlier between the institutions and the industrial environment. It has become very, very important. That's why I say, like Popul has said earlier, how we will build the communities. The communities will be built like this. Just imagine, on one side, there are institutions where professors and teachers who are teaching things for 20 years, 15 years, 25 years, they carry a set of knowledge which was relevant 20 years ago. How much time they have invested in upgrading themselves, how much effort and resources has been provided by the institutes and the colleges to make their teachers updated with the technology. That's not going to take place anymore. If the institute have to stay relevant, they have to collaborate with industry to get newer inputs about the technology, about the advancement, about the newer thing which is happening onto every field around them. And same thing with industry. Industry must collaborate with the institute and the universities and the colleges, keep interacting with students, keep telling them about newer thing, keep making them excited about the newer thing which is happening around them. So if that happens, and if our younger generation understands that only option of going ahead is to keep doing, keep learning, keep exploring, and keep finding answers, or keep trying to find answers, is the best way to success. That's my input.
Thank you so much for that, Piyush. And I completely understand what you're trying to say. And I hope our young audience members are also understanding. Sometimes the first step to figuring out what you want to do is to just start. Don't wait for your fear and anxiety and uncertainty to finish. That's never going to happen. And these were parts of our lives even before COVID as well. So take all your fear, your anxiety, your uncertainty, and just channel it into the first step, and everything else will figure itself out. Just remember what was talked about here by Pupul and Piyush. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in today. Thank you, Piyush. Thank you, Pupul. It was lovely to have you here. And guys, for more information on Internshape, log on to www.internshape.com. That's internship with an A. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely weekend. Bye.